welcome to the Sacred Mysteries. And we are going to be looking, hopefully, very carefully at Matthew chapter 1 with my good friend Ben Cabe. And I hope you enjoy it and get something out of it. I think in Matthew 1, on the surface, it's about as counterintuitive as you can imagine by starting off with a genealogy. Not a way to win friends and influence people. Not a way to sell your books at Barnes and Noble, that's for sure. And yet Matthew does this phenomenally radical thing of starting it off, of all things, with a genealogy. I think as Matthew progresses in the early chapters, Matthew has an agenda, and he wants us to see that Jesus is the new Moses. He's the new a lot of things, but he's certainly the new Moses, because in chapter 2, he will go to Egypt. He'll come out of Egypt. He'll go through waters. He will go out into a wilderness. He'll go up on a mountain. There'll be a transfiguration. There's no way in the first century a Jewish person could listen or read this and not go, oh my gosh, that's the story of Moses. That's exactly what Moses said. He goes to Egypt. He crosses the waters of the Red Sea. He goes out into the wilderness. He goes up on a mountain. He's transfigured. It's just Moses 2.0 with Jesus is all that it is. So I think it's pretty easy to see that. The only question is, why is Matthew doing that? And one of the reasons might be that he is constructing a new kingdom. And instead of having 12 tribes, he'll have 12 apostles. He'll have followers just like Moses had followers. But he's also a new David. He's a new Solomon. He's a new Jonah. He's a new Adam. He's a new Israel. He's all of these wrapped into one. So got to be kind of careful, I guess, when you read it to kind of pick out which one he's doing and try to figure out why he's doing it.
So let's go back and talk a little bit about audience, because
Sure.
Matthew is writing to a predominantly Jewish audience. Would that be
no question about that? I agree.
Statement.
Yep.
So these things would not be lost on them as they're reading.
No.
Like they're lost on us, you know?
Sure. Absolutely. They are, but not on them.
Exactly. But this was written for a Jewish audience. And take me through that genealogy. Why start out that way?
I think, as I happen to have a copy of Sacred Scripture right here, as you do, it begins with the book of the genealogy, which that word for genealogy could be translated Genesis, and it fits perfectly with Genesis 5:1, where it says the beginning of the Genesis, or the book of Genesis, the beginning of the book of Adam. Well, this is almost, there's no way you can read that if you're Jewish or listen to it as they would have been and I think, oh, that's how it starts off. And they would have known the chapter division, of course, but nonetheless, it's exactly how Genesis chapter 5 starts out. The book of the generation of Adam. This is the book of the generation of Jesus. It is interesting, of course, as you know, that the story of the Bible is from one Adam to the last Adam.
Yeah.
So there is a connection in Adam. And then here it says the son of David and the son of Abraham. There's two ways you can take that. You can say son of David and son of Abraham are titles that indicate something, or you can take them literally. Son of David, Solomon would be the most obvious one. And the son of Abraham would be Isaac. Well, there's obviously connection between Jesus and Isaac and between Jesus and Solomon. In fact, in Matthew 12, Jesus says, referring to himself, a greater than Solomon is here. And here with the Isaac story, of course, you know, the famous Genesis 22 of Abraham offering Isaac on Mount Moriah. There's all kinds of connections there. So I think Matthew is setting the stage for something here. And then, as you said, then he goes into this genealogy that goes on for 17 verses. Now, granted, this isn't First Chronicles, which goes on for 9 chapters. So, and then not only does it go on for 17 verses, it's broken up into 3 sections of 14. So when you read that, you can't read that and not say to yourself, okay, what am I supposed to see here? Somebody is obviously manipulating these variables here. No question about that. And I think when you realize that the 3 sections are broken up into sections of 14 each, and coincidentally, if you count down 14 people in the genealogy, guess what you come to? David. Well, when you take David's name in Hebrew, which would be Dalet, Vav, Dalet, and you add the numerical value of those Hebrew letters, guess what? You said it, it's 14. Coincidence? That is a massive coincidence, unless someone's doing it on purpose, which I would argue that they are. We're supposed to see that Jesus is the new David. Oddly enough, the only 2 people in genealogy who are given titles are Jesus and David. David the king, Jesus the Messiah. So it's all kind of, we're supposed, and I think what we're supposed to see is Jesus is a new David, but he's going to be greater than David. He's a new Moses, but he's going to be greater than Moses. He's not going to do what they did in a negative light. He's going to do what they did in a positive light, and then even take it to a new level. So there are things in the genealogy like that that I think we're supposed to see. You know, like you said, they're lost on us. So you have to really dig like you're a detective. So yeah, I think that's what's going on there most likely.
Well, and that's part of the beauty of scripture as a whole. I mean, if you're able to get in there and look at it, we were just having a conversation the other day where we were talking about the early church fathers and
Yeah.
how you and I hadn't discovered them until
Oh.
far later than we would have hoped.
Oh.
And our minds were completely blown.
Oh yeah. And you were way ahead of me on that one. And I remember you putting them on audio and posting them as you're just reading through on them so people could access the audio version of that. Like you say, I finally got on board. And when I did, it was life-changing, my friend.
Yeah.
When I saw what they were doing, and then almost simultaneously, I'm learning Hebrew down in South Bend from a rabbi, and I get talking to him, and he says, yeah, that's how the rabbis did it. They had all these intertextual connections. They use foreshadowing. They use gematria, which is the numerical value of the letters. They're using chiasms. And then you read the New Testament, and guess what? They're doing the exact same thing. Then you read the early church fathers, and you got it. They're doing the exact same thing. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. And once you see it, like you say, it is both mind-blowing and arresting.
Absolutely. Well, I was just thinking as you were talking there, as an Eastern Orthodox Christian, one of the things that we like to say is it's both and, it's not either or. And I'm
absolutely
specifically of the early schools of thought and interpretation of scripture and Alexandrian, like the Alexandrian thought or the Antiochian, and specifically in how I read scripture prior to becoming Orthodox. It was very flat for me. It was very flat. And I'm not trying to go off on a polemic here. I'm not trying to go off on a polemic here. What I'm just trying to point out is that there's so much more than you can ever imagine here in these pages. And it's beautiful.
I was very frustrated before I discovered all this. I would read it and go, man, well, why am I not reading Lord of the Rings? That's much more interesting. I'm not getting anything out of this. And as you both know, not to cast aspersion, but we were not mentored very well. Yeah. And maybe not even their fault. They didn't know. I don't think they had any idea what we're talking about.
I think that's the biggest problem. People don't know. And I want to pull back and just say, the point of starting this channel, the reason you wanted to start this channel, and then brought the idea to me was to essentially just let people know.
Absolutely.
Just let people know the things that you can find in these pages. I think we're off to a good start. So take me to, is there anything else you want to say about the genealogy here? I mean, I know there's plenty.
Well, of course, one thing that comes up, and I was always left a little flat when I would read commentaries, and they would mention, oh, there's 5 women mentioned. Okay, that's true. Nothing wrong with that. But the explanation for those 5 women always left me, again, flat. They're Gentiles, they're women, they're kind of shady a little bit, but they never took it to the next point was, and what are we supposed to get from that besides that? And the answer was nothing. And I can remember one day looking at this and thinking, okay, what are they really as shady as we make them out to be? And I began to really push back against that. Tamar dresses up as a harlot, and for good reason. Judah will not give her his next son. So now she's destitute, a lonely widow, where she should be trying to get married to the next brother, but he won't give his son to her. So she dresses up as a harlot and has relations with Judah so she can get pregnant, maybe just to survive, for goodness sakes, in the ancient world. So it isn't like she's a shady lady of the night, a woman of ill repute. And I'm not saying there may not be any negative connection to that at all for what she did, but I certainly understand why she did it. And then you say Rahab. Well, Rahab was a prostitute. She embraces the God of Israel. She lies to hide the spies. And as a result of that, she's never condemned for that. In fact, she's commended, in the New Testament for that. So we have two ladies there, Tamar and Rahab, which I don't think are nearly as bad as people have made them out to be. And then you have Ruth. What did Ruth do? She lay at the feet of Boaz, which does in Hebrew have some sexual overtones, but they never consummated anything that night. In fact, he tells her, make sure you leave early enough so people don't see you leave. He's trying to be an honorable man about it. And then you have Bathsheba, who, what is she going to do when the king summons her? She can't say no. He can have her executed for treason. She didn't have a choice. So these women are not nearly as bad as they're made out to be. But in each case of those four women I just named, there's a sexual cloud of ill repute hanging over their head. And I think what we're supposed to see is those four women who have this sexual cloud over their head, which is not nearly as bad as it's made out to be, are supposed to lead us to the final woman in the genealogy, and that's Mary, who also will have a sexual cloud hanging over her head as if she's done something bad. And guess what? She hasn't. So all five women aren't nearly as bad. Of course, Mary obviously isn't nearly as bad since she's a sinless virgin. And yet I think the four women lead you to Mary because they're preparing you. It's almost like the writer's going, oh, you need to take a look at this because I'm going to reveal the final woman and you need to be prepared for her by what these four women did not do. And so we finally get to Mary and go, another false accusation against a woman. And it doesn't end there. Guess what? Mary, as we both think, as Orthodox and Roman Catholics, Mary always leads to Jesus. And that's the point, because what would they say about Jesus is that he's a bastard. He's an illegitimate son. So the four women lead to Mary. Mary leads to Jesus. I think we're supposed to see that when you read the genealogy. And they are preparing for us kind of in baby steps of what to expect. And then when you get there, going, you can breathe a sigh of relief because it's not nearly as bad as it, was presumed.
Right. And that leads us right into the next section here about the virgin birth.
Sure. Absolutely. Which is, does it get more, I don't want to say maybe the word invasive is not the word, but more outrageous that God has decided to visit planet Earth? Talk about sacred mysteries, the whole incarnation thing. And I have a feeling we're probably on the same page with this, Ben. When I think about the sacred mysteries, the reason they're sacred and they're mysteries because we can't understand them. If we could understand them, that's not much of a mystery. And frankly, wouldn't be very attractive to me.
Yeah.
So when we talk about sacred mysteries, they are just that. And whenever I cannot not think about them without the famous Latin phrase, credo quia absurdum est. I believe because it's absurd. If it wasn't absurd and ridiculous, what is attractive about that? That I could explain some human philosophy that Tim Smith could understand with the finite brain? Don't sign me up for that anytime soon. Not interested.
I agree with you entirely. And the interesting thing too is that although we can't understand these things, you can sense a beauty and a kind of sacred, like you would say, a sacred mystery, a mysterious quality about it that touches a point beyond reason.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is one of the most attractive things about, I think, both of our faiths, is that we have these beautiful mysteries. And we're not trying to always figure everything out like it's an algebra problem, for goodness sakes, because eventually you'll figure it out. I don't want to figure these things out with my brain. I'd be disappointed if I could, to be perfectly honest with you. But the incarnation, that God's going to invade planet Earth, it doesn't get more amazing than that. That should arrest our attention immediately. And so what you have here, to kind of leave the genealogies for a second here, is that there are things in the genealogy, and let me mention just one more real quickly. When you read in the English Bible, in verse 10, it says, Manasseh begot Ammon, but it's really not Ammon, and I'll hold off on that for a second. And then when you scoot ahead in verse 8, it talks about Asa begot Jehoshaphat, and Manasseh in verse 10 begot Ammon. But that's not what it says in the Greek text, oddly enough, which means that Matthew had to change that. So what you get in the Greek text is not Asa, but Asaph from the Psalms. what you get in verse 10 is not Ammon, but Amos the prophet. It's like, what? Matthew knows what he's doing. So the only question is, why does he purposely change that? Well, there may be a couple of things going on here. One, we've already had people from the Torah mentioned, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Asa becomes Asaph. That would be the writings, the wisdom literature. And then in verse, in verse 10, you have Ammon would be Amos. You have the prophets. So you have the law, the writings, and the prophets. It's like,
beautiful.
like okay, it's like you get these little nuggets and you have to dig like you're in a mine to find them, but they're there to be sure. And then you mentioned, the birth of Jesus. Wow, this passage is so rich, and Joseph's reaction is very interesting. And while he is sleeping, he has a dream, and because he wants to privately put Mary away. And I've thought about this a lot lately. And I thought about, what exactly is going on there? Joseph is, we're told in verse 19 that Joseph is a righteous man. In Hebrew, he'd be considered a tzaddik, the righteous man. So if he's a righteous man, I'm going to assume I'm told that because that will help explain what he is about to do by putting Mary away as an honorable man. So in the midst of doing that, he falls asleep. And then he is awakened and he is told to take Mary to be his bride. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how many times in the New Testament do I have to read something? And if I think hard enough, I think, where have I seen that before? The first Adam is put into a deep sleep. He awakes. And guess what? Here's your bride. We've seen this story before.
Yeah.
So that's partly what's going on here. And I'm going to argue that one of the reasons Joseph may have wanted to put Mary away as a just and righteous act, because what is in Mary is of the Holy Spirit. God has invaded the body of Mary. I'm sure Joseph had to have been thinking, time for me to back off. I'm not touching this anytime soon. So I'm going to do the right thing and just back out of this. I really think that's probably what he was saying. Now, if you ask me for chapter and verse, okay, you got me. No chapter and verse. But I think there's enough in the text that it's worth certainly contemplating about for sure on that. So that's kind of how I see these opening verses beginning with verse 18. And there's a bookend. There's a bookend here in verse 18 and 25. It talks about before they came together, and then in verse 25 that Joseph does not know her until she brings forth their firstborn son. Yeah. Well, you know where this is going. So
tell me about that. Tell me about that until. I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard people say, well, clearly, they're not getting busy until afterwards. But
exactly.
he has other son, they have other kids together, and this is
sure.
This is kind of the classic
it is
thinking.
And I would say my first thing is when someone brings up verse 25, I would say to them, with all due respect, the Bible wasn't written in English. So there are times you have to look at the Greek text. And when you do that, you're not looking at it in black and white anymore. You're going to look at it in color. You can see all the nuances. Well, the phrase in Greek in verse 25 is Heos who. Well, all you got to do is start running references from the Old Testament. And people say, oh, I got you now, Smith. Old Testament was written in Hebrew. It's not going to apply. Yes, it is, because in about 250 BC, they translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek. And there are mentions of this phrase throughout the Old Testament. When Saul's daughter, Michal, dies at the end of 2 Samuel 6, it says she did not have any children until the day of her death. I don't know anyone who thinks that she was producing kids after she expired. Obviously, that's just nonsense. Or Paul tells Timothy, give attendance unto reading, read publicly the scriptures in 1 Timothy 4 until I come. I don't think anybody believes that when Paul arrives, they quit reading the Bible. So what I would say is, one, it's not written in English, it's written in Greek. And what does the Greek indicate there? And that phrase, heasu, only tells you what happened up until that point. It has no interest whatsoever grammatically on telling you what happened after that. So it only it does is tell you up until that point they did not have sexual relations. It does not say afterwards that you can draw any conclusion whatsoever. So I think just kind of a simple cursory reading of the Greek text and a little Greek grammar solves that problem rather easily.
Yeah, and I believe another one of those references in the New Testament is Christ saying, "Behold, I am with you always, even until the end of the age."
Yeah, nobody believes it stops. Yeah, like when the end of the age comes, you're on your own, dude. So that's not part of the text.
It's interesting here too, because some of the church fathers early on talked about this leading into, Mary's perpetual virginity. You have in the, I believe, 3rd century, you have Origen. You have, him followed by Athanasius, Jerome, Augustine. And this was pretty much a widely held tenet of the church very early on.
Without controversy. And I think the fact that it's pretty much without controversy is overlooked. Now, eventually in the 5th century, I think it is, where Jerome and Helvidius will battle out, which we still have that debate. You can read it online, which is amazing that we still have that thing.
It's incredible. And also, one of my favorite things to point out is that John Calvin.
Yes.
John Calvin.
And Martin Luther.
And Martin Luther, but in referencing the debate between Helvidius and Jerome, John Calvin said Helvidius showed excessive ignorance.
Yes, exactly. This is not a debate at the time of the Protestant Reformation. No. All the reformers believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary. And to me, one of the things that does kind of stand out, as I mentioned, is that there's no big throwdown about this in the early days of and the reason for that is because everybody believes it. And to which I always say, if Mary and Joseph had all of these rugrats running around, where are they at? They go to Egypt, no mention of them. They come back out of Egypt, no mention of them.
Yeah.
Slaughter the innocents, no mention of them. Jesus in the temple at 12, no mention of them.
Yeah.
And then at the cross, what does Jesus tell the apostle John? Take Mary into your custody. Odd thing to say if he has all these brothers and sisters. None of this makes any sense at all. It really doesn't. And I think the evidence is overwhelming. But if you've never heard this before, I can understand why it would be a little odd, because you'll read, as you know, in Matthew 13, that Jesus has 4 brothers and their name, and sisters in the plural. Again, I would caution people, the Bible's not written in English. If it was, we'd have different issues. But the Greek word there, adophos, for the Greek word for brother, can mean a lot of different things. It can mean uterine sibling, to be fair. It can also mean cousin, near kinsman, spiritual brother. It can mean a lot of things. And as you pointed out in a text to me earlier, and one of the things that the Orthodox Church leans on is a very early document, the Proto-Evangelium of James, where in that document it says what?
Well, in the Proto-Evangelium of James, the idea essentially is Joseph is a widower.
Right.
And he has children by another marriage and was chosen by miraculously to take her into his home.
Right,
exactly. Take Mary into his home. And that's how they got together. Of course, that would be the Eastern Orthodox kind of take on the situation. But as you pointed out, the Greek here can mean a number of different things. And if I'm not mistaken, Abraham and Lot, that word is used to describe their relationship, the Septuagint in the Greek Old Testament.
Which, of course, they were not uterine siblings.
No.
Lot was his nephew. So you have to say, well, why is it okay to use the word there? And then I've heard as a pushback against this, yeah, but you can't use that. You just have to use the 4 Gospels. To which I say, no, I don't.
Well, it's clearly not what Matthew's doing here.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. And that's the thing that I think the early church fathers, which is the most unread piece of beauty that people just aren't aware of for whatever reason, and they don't read them. And I would say, and I always was curious, even before I read them, Ben, I always would be thinking, what did the earliest Christians say? What were they thinking? What were they writing down? Well, guess what we have? You have it in all of their 38 volumes, my friend.
Yes.
I have a mini version at this point, but who knows what the future holds.
But here's the thing to point out, too. 38 volumes is only a minuscule number of the available.
That's true.
If you look at Mean, I think I said that right. It's the French dude. in his collection in Greek and Latin. Huge.
Yes, massively. 38 is nothing. Like
yeah.
you said, that's just a pittance of what's out there. That's just what basically has been translated into English.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So who knows what's there that we don't even know about?
That's true.
And in my lifetime, I'll probably never know about them, but it's there. Yeah, fascinating. And so when we think about Matthew 1, and you know, for example, I think one of the things that I did not do early on was when the Old Testament was quoted, I never went back and read the quotation and see what it was in context.
Yeah.
That is a massive mistake. So when Matthew quotes Isaiah 7:14, a virgin will conceive and give birth and bring forth a son. His name would be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. Well, in the origin of that would be in Isaiah 7:14. And what you have in Isaiah 7:14 is you have Assyria about to pounce on Judah with Israel, the northern 10 tribes. And then they're trying to also get Syria on their side, and they're trying to get Judah to join forces. And what's interesting about that, of course, is Judah Ahaz, who's kind of a self-pious demagogue in Judah. He says no. He said, no, I'm not going to join your forces. And then God speaks to Ahaz and said, ask me for a sign. Well, pious Ahaz goes, no, I'm not going to ask you for a sign. Look, if God says ask me for a sign, it's okay to do it. And so God says, you don't want to ask me? I'll give you a sign then. And that's when he said, an Alma in Hebrew, which can be a young maiden. It can also be virgin, although the normal word for virgin is Betula in Hebrew. But the point is, it says, here's a sign to you. A young woman will conceive and give birth. Well, how's that much of a sign? Young women get pregnant all the time. Doesn't seem like much of a sign to me. So when they translated the Bible from Hebrew to Greek, they use a very specific word, parthenos. And parthenos can only mean virgin, someone who's never had a sexual relation. So Matthew takes that, and originally that passage was all about judgment. Yet we use it around Christmas time to sing all the carols and the first Noel, but it's judgment. And what I would argue is, I think what Matthew is telling us here is, guess what? Judgment is about to hit again, because Israel is not going to believe. Jesus knows they're not going to believe. And what's the end result of that? Judgment on the temple, AD 70, the temple comes tumbling down. So the judgment that struck Israel in the Old Testament would again strike Israel in the New Testament. And so once again, because we don't go back and read the Old Testament passages that are quoted in the New Testament, as a result, we don't say, oh my goodness, this could be another judgment about that, because we think Jesus has come. That's a great blessing. And it is to a certain degree. I agree. But there's a judgment thing going on here too that I don't think we can miss, because think about it, man. When that temple comes down, no more sacrifices, no more priesthood, no more temple. That is a life changer, my friend. I mean, today is the last day of Yom Kippur on the Jewish calendar, the highest holy day in all of Judaism. And I remember asking the rabbi who I studied with down in South Bend once, Rabbi, what do? You have no temple. You haven't offered a sacrifice in 2,000 years. What do you do in its place? And he looked at me and he says, we engage in what is called chesed. And what is chesed? Acts of loving kindness. That's what has replaced the temple in modern day Judaism, or Orthodox Judaism at least. So it is interesting that that's something I would not want to over or underemphasize, is we have to read the Old Testament passages that these are coming from,
30-40 minutes is not enough time to do this. I think we need to make that very clear to whoever's watching. This is a work in progress. But that being said, if someone is just finding out about all this stuff, where would you send them to look for more? Obviously, coming back to the channel to listen to maybe some more things that you can reveal to them. But the church fathers, for instance, what would you say beyond just reading the text here? Where do you look?
I would say a few things. One, certainly the early church fathers, because they're so unread, it's almost embarrassing. You have the 38-volume set. That's going to cost you a chunk of change nowadays, to be sure, unless you find a library like Notre Dame or Andrews or some local library, but not everyone's local that's going to watch this, hopefully. So yeah, and the early church fathers are online for free, if I'm not mistaken.
They are. Yep. I believe Kevin Knight has edited them and put them up on New Advent.
Newadvent.org.
I think it's .org.
Yes, it is. So there's that. What I have picked up, I have some individuals like, Ignatius, Irenaeus, the earliest ones. You can buy individual ones on Amazon for a very reasonable price. I also picked up, there's a 4-volume set of books called the Sunday Sermons of the Church Fathers. So instead of reading the Church Fathers as far as their doctrinal stances, which is what you're going to do for the most part with the set that you have and the few individual volumes that I have, read their sermons. Oh my gosh, It is a treasure trove on how they handle the text. How they handle the text is brilliant. It also will probably stun you a little bit, but I would say that we need to be better readers of the text, because I think we're all kind of seduced by the lullaby effect. Oh, I know that story. No, you really don't. Slow down, read it carefully, learn to be a good noticer, move into the neighborhood, stay there, camp out, learn everything you can about wherever you're camped out at, whatever chapter it is. And I'll give you a quick example. When I first started this, I remember reading John chapter 5. Here's this guy who's been lame, and we're told for 38 years. I'm thinking, why was I told that? I am not kidding, 100 commentaries on John 5. Nobody mentioned why. I'm thinking, if John would have just said he's been lame a long time, we would have gone, okay, no questions asked. But he didn't. He said 38 years. Finally, I got a concordance out, and I thought, I'm going to look up the number 38, how many times it's mentioned in the Bible. Just random. Guess what? It's only mentioned one other time. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, we're told that Israel wandered for 38 years in the wilderness. Bingo. And why they wandered for 38 years? Because they wandered in unbelief. So I transfer that to the guy in John 5. Why can't this guy get down to the water to be healed? Because he represents Israel in the times of Jesus, and they're still walking in unbelief, and that's why he can't make it to the pool. So I'm thinking there's a connection, but nobody is commenting on this stuff. And it's not like I'm some super genius. I'm figuring this stuff out. That has nothing to do with it. It's just, if you don't look for it, you don't see it. And I think at the end of the day, we just, like I say, we have to realize that we're reading literature and understanding that it's literature. There's literary devices, whether it's understanding in the Hebrew text, although it's also true in Greek, just nobody ever really used it. But they use it in Hebrew all the time, where if you look at the numerical value of a word, all of a sudden patterns will begin to emerge. Or the chiasm. What's the point of a chiasm? And that's when it goes from like A, B, C, D, C, B, A. The point of a chiasm is that middle letter, in this case D, because that's going to tell you that's the main point of that particular passage. That's why, to me, memorizing verses, to me, never made any sense at all. Memorize passages, because they didn't write in verses. They wrote in sections or pericopes or passages, whatever fancy word you want to use. And when you see it that way, oh my goodness, things will just be blossom, flower. And it's almost so much that you can't even handle it, to be honest with you. It really is. So I don't know.
That's why you started this channel.
Exactly. There's a lot of stuff here.
Awareness.
And there's a lot of stuff. I mean, just take how verse 17 ends about the generations from Abraham to David, David to Babylon, Babylon to Christ. What you have there is the mini history of Israel in one verse. It's brilliant. But what's left out of that, no mention of the restoration under Nehemiah and Ezra. But think about maybe why that is. They rebuild the temple, and guess what? There's no Ark of the Covenant. Can't have a valid priesthood. Can't offer sacrifices. It's an empty temple for all intent and purposes. How sad is that? So at the time of Jesus, you basically have an empty temple. The Ark of the Covenant hasn't been seen in about 500 years. At a later episode, we can talk about maybe that and the connection with the Ark of the Covenant at the end of Revelation 11 and chapter 12. All kinds of fruit to be picked off that tree, let me tell you. But until then, I think what you have with the arrival of Jesus of Nazareth is a lot of things going on that aren't good. And what becomes, oddly enough, a running metaphor is Judas. Oddly enough, the things that Jesus says to and about Judas, he says the exact same things about the Jewish religion. Have I not chosen you 12 and one's a devil? You are of your father the devil. The exact same thing. So it's almost like, and Judas, by the way, is the only apostle that we know of that came from Judea The other 11 come from Galilee. So Judas is enmeshed geographically where the temple is, where the Jewish religion is, and there's close connections between the two. Of course, they will join forces at the very end. So the temple is not in good shape. Jewish faith is not in good shape for a lot of different reasons. And of course, we will, as we both know, a lot of people know, we'll see this come to a climax during Holy Week when he cleanses the temple. We don't cleanse something that's not dirty. And I've been convinced for a long time that most people who read that, they just think that Jesus threw a hissy fit and threw people out with their furniture. That is not what's going on in that passage at all. Because if you read it carefully, it sounds like the very same language used in Leviticus when a house is condemned for having leprosy. So I think what's going on there is Jesus is condemning the temple, because what would you do in the Old Testament when a house was condemned to leprosy? You took it down brick by brick, which is exactly what Jesus says is going to happen to the temple, and you put it in an unclean place. Well, Jerusalem, according to Revelation 11:8, is an unclean place. And so it is the language of leprosy. The temple has spiritual leprosy, and Jesus condemns it. And because of that, it has to be disassembled and come down. So there's all kinds of things going on. And these things that we're talking about, Ben, as you mentioned, they are all over the place. It's not just a chapter here, a chapter there. And what I would encourage people to do is understand the Bible's fun. It's not boring. It's not tedious. There's all kinds of things going on. And once you learn just a few literary devices, you won't be able to unlearn them, and you'll start seeing things everywhere, which is what we're supposed to do, for goodness sakes. So, yeah, thanks for doing this first video with me. This has been a lot of fun, and hopefully many more to follow.